What are the three questions people should ask their thoughts?
Yeah, so these are what I call Trojan horse questions. You're going to hear them and go, I know those words. Those aren't special words. Like, they're pretty simple. But if you ask them and if you actually sit with them, there's truth hidden inside them. So the first question you ask is it true? Is this thing I'm telling myself true? This soundtrack, the story I'm telling myself about myself, the story I'm telling about a friend, the story I'm telling about a project, the story I'm telling about something stressful coming up, is it true? The second question you ask your soundtrack is it helpful? The more I say it, does it move me forward or hold me back? And the third question you ask is it kind? If I said it to a friend, would they still want to be my friend? And what's really interesting, I've done a bunch of these interviews lately, and I've been doing podcasts, and usually in the middle of the podcast, it changes from a topical conversation to a heart conversation. And just the other day, I told this podcast host those three questions, and he said, oh no. I said, what? He said, well, I've got the #1 podcast in my category. I've had the #1 podcast for 9 months. And the soundtrack I've been listening to over and over is, you're just lucky, you're just lucky, you're just lucky. And he said, if a friend came over and they had been really successful for 9 months on something and they'd worked really hard, I'd never say, you're just lucky. He said, so why am I saying that to myself? And you need to ask all three. And here's why. Let's say you want to get in shape. You want to start learning how to be, ride a bike. You want to be a cyclist. And you say to yourself at the beginning, the soundtrack is, you say, I'm not good at cycling. Now that might be true. At the beginning of anything, nobody's good at anything. Like, that might be true. You're not good at it. But is it helpful to tell yourself that? Every time you tell yourself that, does it encourage you to get better, or does it make you feel ashamed and pull back? Third question, is it kind? Is it nice to yourself to say that over and over and over again? And here's the problem. Our thoughts tend to deteriorate. They don't naturally become amazing. In the same way that exercise, I've never met somebody that said, yeah, I was just binge watching Netflix all the time. I looked up and I had abs. I had a 6-pack abs. Like, I was really in shape. Or I was binge watching Netflix, just looked up, I was doing burpees. I was doing push-ups right in my living room. Like, we have to work at it. And over time, our thoughts, if we're not careful, will change in a negative way. So you might start out going, I don't know how to be a good parent. Maybe that's true right now. Maybe today that's true. I would ask you to add the word yet, because I think you can learn. But what happens is, over time, it turns into, I'll never learn how to be a good parent, or everyone's always a better parent than me. Same with kids. Kids get the soundtracks concept so fast because they don't have 20 years of broken soundtracks to unlearn. Like, when you teach a kid the truth, they sprint with it. But if you hear a kid say to you, a 9-year-old say, I'll never be good at math, that's where you pause and go, whoa, wait a second. That's a broken soundtrack. Like, you're making a declaration at 9. Like, you might live to 89. You don't know in the next 80 years what's going to happen. Like, you can say instead, I want to get better at math. That's a true soundtrack. That's something you can work on. And so I think another example for me on a personal level, like, I probably 10 or 12 years ago had a crisis at a job I started. I started this company for advertising, and we had a client. The project went sideways, and I had to kind of save the day. I had to come in, and it was a terrible crisis. And I learned in that moment, I can function in a crisis. That's a good soundtrack. That's a true thing. But over time, that turned into, I function best in a crisis. And all of a sudden you go, whoa, wait a second. And then over time, that turned into, I need a crisis to function.
Wow.
And we've all worked with leaders like that. Wow. Leaders who are amazing at putting out fires, but when there's not any fires, they feel worthless. And leaders don't like feeling worthless, so what do? They start a fire.
Yeah.
And they self-sabotage. And so my wife 4 years ago said to me, she said, you're a jerk for the 2 years when you write a book, and you're a jerk for the 2 years when you sell it, and that's not going to work. She said, I'd rather you be a happy plumber than a miserable writer. And what she was saying was that for me to write a project like a book, which is massive, I had to stir up all this chaos, all this stress, all this fire. And I realized I need a different soundtrack. This isn't a good long-term sustainable soundtrack. And so that's why you ask those three questions. You go, okay, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it kind? If you can't say yes to all those, it might be a broken soundtrack to retire.